Alright, hello people. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone's doing alright. I just wanted to review this game I played a couple minutes ago, and I want to talk a little bit about philosophy, chess philosophy specifically, because I also have a student that joined the group recently that was asking how to improve, essentially what to spend your time studying. And it's not an easy question to answer. Chess is it's just big. The game itself is massive. There are so many possible positions. So I think it comes down kind of to preference. Maybe you can take out a notebook and write down what type of style you play in. So if you're an attacking player, then you're gonna want to study more openings like e4 to begin with as white, or as black, possibly the Najdorf, the Sicilian variations. Gambits. Gambits are good to study if you're an attacking player. And if you're more of a positional player, then you're gonna want to look up the London openings, the d4s, and you're gonna want to study a lot of end games. So I'm playing black here. e4, e5, I've studied a lot. Typically play ends up coming like this, and we get something that turns into possibly a Berlin, possibly an Italian game. Sometimes the Evan Gambit comes out, which I've studied quite a bit for black as well. Not as much as I would like to, but yeah, if you're an attacking player, also study the Evans Gambit for white. It gives lots of opportunities for sharp play. Oh, and I also, Sandkulp was asking me to make a video about the tools that Lichess has. Let's see. So I'm trying to find where it should be available just on the game itself. Also, if you want to study openings without having your particular game up, just go to Analysis Explorer or Analysis Board. Go here and just throw moves up on the board. So like the opening I was talking about. Say you want to study the Stafford Gambit, you're going to go like this. And it's something like this. D3 and bishop c5. So you can see the engine says that this is much better for white, and probably practically speaking it is, but if you want an opening for blitz that you are likely to get a very sharp game out of, and if white doesn't know that this is actually an opening to some extent, then white's probably just going to get mated over here. Knight g4 is a move. Huh. Very interesting. So this is of course following computer moves, but even here you can see the engine says it's still only +1/6. You could probably even castle long here if you wanted to. And there's lots of pressure here. And again, if white doesn't know what he's doing, you may get a pleasant game or just a quick smash as black. But I'm gonna go back to my game. See, there should be, oh, here it is, it's right here. So you click this little button and it pulls up the graph. You can see this is my performance graph against this player, and it shows inaccuracies, mistakes, blunders. So I had 4 inaccuracies, 1 mistake, and no blunders. 24 average centipawn loss. And centipawns just mean 100th of a pawn in terms of valuation. So if I had a 24 average centipawn loss in this game, that means I lost a quarter of a pawn over the duration of the game. I may need to look up centipawn loss to see more accurately what that means. He had 9 inaccuracies, 2 mistakes, 1 blunder, 41 average centipawn loss. Okay, so knight c3 I'm not super familiar with, but see, you can see, especially if you're on your laptop, it's a little more difficult on the phone. But on the laptop, if you're analyzing the game that you just played, you have opening book just sitting here. You can review your entire opening, and you can see all of the percentages. You can see as white, the bigger the gray bar in the middle, it means the more draws that have happened. So f5, well, f5 is saying 65% white wins. So you wouldn't play f5 unless you know that opening. Okay, so bishop c5. Now there are some lines that can go like this. And bishop d6. I used to play other moves here when this type of sacrifice would happen. It's just good to know this theme. This is a thematic sacrifice, and if you don't know what you're doing as black, you can be very bad after that. But just remember that bishop back to d6 is the correct line after d4. I used to play something like this, and then they would take, let's see what that looks like. I'd play here, takes, and do something like, yeah, that's just not good. Whatever I used to do wasn't great. Or else I would pull it back here. But you can just check. And these are blitz games, so yes, he's getting doubled pawns, and I have something to sort of work with. But doubled pawns don't matter, because if he comes here, f4 is going to happen, and this pawn will be supported. So you almost have to like gambit it back. But again, the way to play this is just to bring the bishop back. Takes, takes. As you can see, the computer evaluates this as just normal opening advantage for white. And this is also a book. You can see 2700s have played this exact line. And if you want to, you can click on any of the games, and it will open up a separate page. And then it shows how masters handled this exact situation. See? So it's very helpful. And it's also helpful to just play with this with the tools that that Lichess gives you. So let's go back. So he did not play knight takes. Maybe he knows about it, maybe he didn't know about it. He played bishop out. And then after d6, we have this symmetrical pawn structure. And it's just an even game right now. Knight f6 is the typical move in these type of structures. You can play. It is possible to play knight here. The danger of playing knight to e7 is that an attack can come very fast. So for instance, knight e7, knight here, and you're like, oh, I'll just castle. I'll be fine, this is covered. Well, then queen comes out, and there's a double attack on the f7 pawn and the h7 pawn. And essentially in this variation, if you don't know, if you're not aware of it, you have to give up your rook. So let's look at what that looks like. Knight here. Let's turn the engine on. Engine can help us out a little bit. Knight here. So you're like, oh, I'll just castle. I'll cover this one. Castle, and queen comes out, and this is just winning for white. Because you don't want to get mated, obviously, and there's no other way to guard this. If this pawn wasn't here, maybe here, but then this one is weak again. So you have to play here, and then either bishop takes or knight takes. Knight takes is probably the strongest. And you just have to give up your rook. And that's just not good. So just something to remember in these types of positions. Some people like playing this knight out to e7 because it's preparing the f5 break, pawn break, which is very ideal if you're playing as black. But that's just something to know. So he played d3. So then this is where the knight is supposed to be, and the only thing really to be thinking about in this position is whether or not you want to allow this pin to happen. And if you do allow it to happen, for instance, if knight comes here and the pin comes and you don't do anything else, like you don't kick the bishop, then this knight's going to come in and this pin is going to be painful, and eventually he's going to take with either the knight or the bishop, and you're going to have these doubled pawns on the f-file, and it's going to be painful. So when you bring the knight out, just be mindful that that's the main way to try to mess with the structure. So we're still in book here. You can see some games from Anish, from MVL. Nakamura even has a game in here. Sergei Karyakin, top love. So you can tell when you review your games, you can tell if you're playing correctly or not, because if you're playing correctly, you're going to be still in opening book up through. If you can be in book up through at least the first 4 to 5 moves, you'll be doing reasonably well. And I mean in every game. And then if you can get your games up to being an opening book all the way up to like 8 or 9, which is what happens with me if I end up getting into a Berlin or something because it's so well known, then you're doing well. Now, of course, if you don't want to play in theory, lots of the top players avoid theory at certain specific spots that they themselves have done some prep with, because eventually you want to be playing the human being. When you're playing book, you're essentially playing the machine, so you want to get out of book. So let's see where we're at. Okay, I played h6, so I was just preparing to be able to bring my knight out without being harassed by the bishop. And as you can see, we're still in book, and the computer, what it has recorded for the book, the computer is already saying black's doing well with h3, 100%. This might, I wonder if it's keeping my game. No, it's not. I don't know what games have to, maybe you have to be a certain rating for it to get into the opening book, I'm not sure. So I played h6, he played his bishop out. Now, I generally tend to not want to take this because it opens up the F file. And I usually play bishop back, and if it's the same thing over on this side, I'll play bishop back here, usually, just because if he ever takes, then this will open up the A file for myself. So I played bishop back, knight in. The knight's not doing a whole lot there other than saying I would like to trade with your bishop and give myself the bishop pair. So I played knight f6. Note, now he can't do this. c3, he wants to prepare d4 at some point. d4 is always going to weaken this pawn to some extent. Now, I played knight a5 here, that's not necessary. Castles is completely fine. But I played knight a3 knight a5 just to harass his bishop. I was thinking maybe this was going to happen. This was what I was planning to do. And then something like this. And you can see the issue here is that he wants to play b4 and trap my knight. But I do have this here. Takes, and then push. To be able to give my knight a square to go to. Bishop c2. But again, he's going to have this open file on the F file. And I think it's more a matter of preference. I don't like playing against the semi-open file when they're able to put a rook on there. The knight's going to come around. I may have to kick it like this, and then this pawn will be even weaker. So this is fine for black. If this ever happens, I can come back and I'll have this nice c4 square to operate from. And again, if he pushes this too fast, then this pawn might be weak. Oh, I also have c5, and just come back this way. But again, this pressure is not something I was interested in. So he pulled his bishop back, I think. No, he took my dark scored bishop. Okay. Again, you can see with what you're going to find with strong players is that they tend to avoid really complicated positions and they go for the end game. Because the end games are what most people don't seem to study that often, and that's how grandmasters win. They win with end games. Yes, they win with tactics sometimes, with crazy fireworks, but it just doesn't happen super often. Position's still equal. So this is a blunder for him. And it's difficult to see exactly why. Why is this a blunder? Nothing is being lost immediately. I would say it's number one because he's just moving a piece backward without really any clear reason for it, unless he wants to do this and push f5, which maybe that's okay. So let's say I just waited around. He castled. Say I trade the bishop and just develop like normal. Then he has f5, right? And it's not any big advantage for him, but it's better. This is better than what he had going on before. And he's also threatening to take h3, h6, and win this knight in some lines if I move my queen off, like here for instance. And he has this pressure along the f-file. He's got the semi-open file, which is what I was trying to avoid. So he moved his knight back. I castled, and I played knight to g4 with the clear intention of just taking the bishop. I'm going to take both these bishops, and then I'm just going to play f5 myself. And to me, this is the machine might not evaluate it as being an advantage for black, but to me, this is an advantage from my own perspective, because I've gotten the open F file, semi-open F file. I have the semi-open A file, so both of my rooks are as happy as they can be. And I'm always going to play against these pawns. So he kicks the knight, I take the bishop. Now he's got doubled pawns here. I take his other bishop. And he has to take with the knight, otherwise this is extremely ugly. And then I just get f5. And this was my whole intent, was just to get f5. And I'm going to play the endgame. And I'm happy, very happy with this endgame. Takes with the bishop. He kicks my bishop. I come back. So there is another threat here, and that's just to take the knight and give him doubled pawns and a weak pawn on e4. He brings his knight back. This is a blunder, actually. But as you can see, the computer already says black has some small advantage. And psychologically, that's very important, because white feels like they should simply have the advantage out of the opening. And if they feel like black is having some pressure, then it tends to get people feeling a little funky. So the computer says take the rook here, take this. Now it says knight e3 is okay. The tactic isn't available. The tactic, which I will show you, isn't available. But we're just getting pressure. This pawn is weak. It's hard to move that rook. It's saying even... it's saying just take the pawn. So take the pawn. And now black's a pawn up, and white has literally no compensation whatsoever. So the computer is saying black's going to win a pawn no matter what, even if black plays white's going to win a pawn no matter what, even if white plays ideally. So that did not happen. He played knight back to e3 immediately, and that just loses a pawn to queen g5 with the dual threat of queen takes knight and bishop takes h3. And you can't move this knight in a way that protects h3, and you can't bring the queen in to guard both because my rook. So queen g5 is just probably close to winning. I was thinking he needed to play knight here to try to salvage his pawn, but I was just going to kick it. And then I was thinking he could come back here, because now he's guarding h3. But that's just like a super cramped, ugly looking series of moves that he would have had to do. and it just doesn't look good. I was going to go here, knight here. So now he has everything covered, right? Like, he's not losing any pawns immediately. I could still do this, I guess. No, it's saying that's a blunder. Why is that a blunder? Ah, b3. Can't take this, and he's just going to play queen here. Queen e3. Queen c2. Oh, it's saying it's equal now. Okay. It's equal because of g5. Queen takes, g4. Ah, it's the pin, that's why. b4 plus, king h8. Queen e6. So the queen's getting in. And g3. Queen h3 plus is a draw? What? No. Queen h3, sorry. I thought it said this. I was like, what type of ridiculous thing is this? Queen h6. And then checks are going to be happening. Yeah, if I bring the king in this way, then he can check and trade off queens, move the knight, and he's a piece up. But that's just to show some of the more subtle lines that these lines are in every single position. And when you start looking more deeply into the game itself, then you're going to start looking for these types of ideas rather than just my coach said I should put my rooks on open files and I should push past pawns and I should develop all my pieces and I should go for activity and so on. Instead of that, you're going into sort of portions of the game that aren't necessarily touched by the body of knowledge that has been established. You will always get to positions that are simply unique, and you have to look at them as their own little unique microcosm. So after this, I think the game is pretty much won. He just gives the pawn up this way. And again, not only is black a pawn up, but black is also controlling this semi-open file. Black is controlling this fully open F file. And if white ever pushes d4, then I'm going to have a passed pawn. So it's just very bad for white. And this was an even worse move. You don't want to trade off pieces when you're down material. You want to try to create dynamic counterplay. So he did probably the worst move he could here. So I simply traded, bring the king up. The rook could have been activated either way, but I chose to activate it via a4. So he's putting his rook now on the only semi-open file. Well, I guess this is the other one, but he's putting his rook on the second semi-open file. g5. Now, he's offering the rook trade. I was not 100% sure if trading is beneficial, simply because I have these doubled pawns, and in many endgames, if you're a pawn up and the pawn that you're up is doubled, the opposing side can force a draw. So let's look at what that would look like. Computer says take with the h pawn. King e6. a4. Let's just play it out with the computer just a little bit to see if black could even win this. It's looking like not. Yeah, this is a -1, and I'll do best move arrows so this isn't taking so long to see what the computer is recommending. See, it's just having the king shuffle. No more pawns are moving. So it looks like this is a draw. Even though I'm a pawn up, the pawn is doubled. So something to remember. So I did not want to trade rooks, and I did not trade rooks. Instead, I actually I did allow the possibility of a trade. And my logic here was, if he was going to take, I was going to take back with this pawn, which opens up the possibility of h5 and this break here, at which point this pawn would likely be felt because my king would be able to get in. So let's see what that would look like. -2 this time. Yeah, I think my connection's kind of crappy. Yep, so the machine is agreeing with me. This looks scary though, doesn't it? But there are 2 pawns here, so one of these is going to queen before that can get down the board. And this is going to queen with check. Or there's going to be one tempo, then the queen. So yeah, so that idea that I had was actually correct. So he's just pushing. I did see that this could happen, but I wasn't in any hurry. When you're a pawn up and you're pressing on the position, your opponent, number 1, is going to be frustrated. Number 2, they're not necessarily going to know what to do because there's not a lot to do in a position like this. And number 3, they're going to be spending time trying to figure out what to do. So your advantages start compounding on top of each other, and it makes the game relatively easy to win. So let's just play through the moves that happened. Now I saw here that after check, and he moves his king back somewhere. Eventually I'm going to get my king in here, and his king will be tied to the rook, and if the rook ever moves, then this pawn falls. So he went the other way. I'm not sure why. I was thinking he would go this way. But he's in zugzwang now. And if he ever moves the king this way, my king can come in here. And also, just these pawns are... It's just, the position is just completely won. So this is how the game concluded. Now I have a passed pawn on the c-file. This rook, again, if it ever moves, these 2 are going to fall, and then these 2 connected passed pawns are going to be very powerful. So he's picking up 1 pawn, creating this, but these are way too fast. There was one trick here, which I missed, which is rook takes here. That's kind of a cute mate. But yeah, just bring the king in. something like that. So yeah, that's that game. I played a few games with Sandkelp. He actually beat me on the first one. He played pretty well with some sort of Roy Lopez. There were a couple blunders that I had. It wasn't like a forced win, but he played well. And then I won the second game, which he also played well. He's a very attacking style of a person. So I'm going to help him work on his openings and middle games that emphasize that style. And he also said he didn't want to study Bishop Knight endgame, and that he wanted to study openings and middle games, which is fine, but eventually you have to study endgames and you have to study them in depth, and that's how the title players win. They study endgames. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you next time. Peace. Slow, grinding suffocation upon up.